It is with great pleasure that I welcome you to today's webinar. I'd like to begin by telling you a little bit about Engineers Canada. If you're not already familiar with us, Engineers Canada is the national association of the provincial and territorial engineering regulators who license the more than 300,000 members of the engineering profession in Canada. We're the only national voice of the engineering profession. Our purpose is to serve the collective interests of the regulators and to promote and maintain the interests, honor, and integrity of the Canadian engineering profession. We advance Canadian engineering through national collaboration. It's through our work with the regulators and the engineering community that we recognized that there was a need to provide support and guidance to those embarking on their licensure journey. It is with this goal in mind that we created and launched Pathway to Engineering, a platform to connect engineering students and graduates and early career professionals to knowledge about the engineering licensure process and to create a community of professionals that can support them on their journey. Alongside information about the licensure process, Pathway to Engineering also features an ongoing series of articles called Insights, where engineers, both seasoned and aspiring, share their stories and advice about becoming part of the engineering community. I'm very happy to see all of you here to participate in the first session of our quarterly webinar series called Exchanges, where we're hosting real-time conversations about the engineering journey. Exchanges will address topics related to licensure, employment, and the engineering community as a whole. Please sign up to our newsletter or connect on social media to see what's happening and to register for future webinars. And with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague and the moderator for today's event, Kim Bouffard. Kim is the Manager of Belonging and Engagement at Engineers Canada. Kim has been working tirelessly with the team on the Pathways platform and the very first webinar today. Over to you, Kim.
Thank you, Jeanette, for that introduction. As mentioned, my name is Kim Bouffard. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Manager of Belonging and Engagement. On behalf of my team and our communications team, because it was definitely a team effort that brought this all together, I also would like to welcome everyone to this first webinar, the first webinar in this series. It's not uncommon for recent graduates to get conflicting information or to feel overwhelmed with the possibilities following graduation. This webinar, You Have Your Engineering Degree, Now What?, features speakers who are recent engineering graduates to discuss their academic journey, their workplace experience, and how they're using their engineering knowledge to contribute to today's biggest challenges. Before I introduce today's panelists, please know that this webinar has closed captioning available. There's a little button at the bottom that you could just click on. And we'll also be recording today's webinar. I'd also like to encourage all of you to ask questions throughout today's discussions. So that way, as thoughts or questions arise as you hear from different panelists, you can capture them and put them in the chat, and we'll be sure to try and address as many of those as we can. So joining us today on our panel is Alexander Dow, Devyani Vasta, and Benedict James Tamadung. Alexander, who I'll be referring to as Dow throughout today's discussion, is the co-founder of EngiQueers Canada, a national nonprofit that advocates for 2SLGBTQI+ inclusion in the engineering profession. He studied civil engineering at McMaster University in Montreal, Quebec, and graduated in 2018 and obtained his Peng in April 2022. He was awarded the 2023 Ontario Professional Engineers Award for Achievement of the Year. Welcome, Dow. I'd also like to welcome Devyani. Devyani is a recent mechanical engineering graduate with a mechatronics major from Memorial University of Newfoundland. She is currently in engineering training, working as a professional standards coordinator with the Professional Engineers and Geoscientists Newfoundland and Labrador, which we affectionately refer to as PEGNL. Recognized for organizational prowess, effective communication, and rapid learning, she is committed to leaving a positive imprint on the regulatory landscape. So welcome, Devyani. And last but certainly not least is Benedict, who I will be referring to as Ben throughout today's discussion, is a mechanical engineering graduate from the University of British Columbia's Okanagan campus. He is currently an engineer in training, working as a project coordinator for Capital Power Corporation. He is responsible for technical execution of Capital Power developing projects in affordable, reliable, and decarbonized energy production. So welcome, everybody. So to kick things off, my first question is for all the panelists. And what I'd like to do is just help the audience to get to know you a little bit better. So to help that along with that, I'm just wondering if you could share two things about yourself. The first one can be a fun fact, and the second one is what drew you into engineering? Like, why engineering? And so whoever would like to go first, go for it. Floor is yours.
I guess I can go first. My fun fact is that I'm a big travel kid. I love just exploring and adventuring and doing cool things. But that kind of leads me into why engineering and what drew me in. The story goes that when I was in grade 2 or 3 and I took my first vacation as a family, I was told that I was mesmerized by airplanes. And to be honest, I'm still mesmerized by airplanes. But it was from that moment that my dad, who happens to have an engineering background, kind of knew that it was destiny for me. But truth be told, during my engineering degree, I kind of started thinking I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer and then ended up transitioning into engineering leadership, construction engineering, and clean energy technologies. So what I realized was I loved being able to make a true sustainable impact and that I could do that by blending my soft skills with some technical knowledge. And I think that's what created my engineering background, if you will. I guess I'll pass it over to Alex.
Great.
Hi, everyone. Alexander here, also go by Dow. So our engineering wasn't my first choice. I wanted to be an architect, and when I didn't get into the programs that I applied to out of high school, I ended up going into engineering. In a similar tangent to Van, I really enjoyed video games, and everyone might know of the City Skylines or back in my day, it was called SimCity series of building cities. And that's what led me down the path, not only of architecture, but then into engineering, specifically civil engineering. Inspired by my uncle who worked in municipalities here in Ontario, I came back and now work in the land development sector here under a firm called David Schaefer Engineering, alongside my work with Engineers Canada. So I was always fascinated with the idea of building something that lasts longer than yourself, lasting kind of, infrastructure can be a generational thing, whereas you're only around for a span of time. So that was the inspiration there, and I can hand it over to Vianney.
Thank you, Alex. For me, a fun fact would be I love space and I'm fascinated by it. That kind of drew me into physics and maths. It's very cliche, yes. I was very good at physics and math, but at some point I found that it was very theoretical. And when I first encountered engineering, it was like I could see the results in front of me. So that's what drew me into engineering. But my thoughts of how impactful engineering as a career is changed when I started volunteering with the Engineering Change Lab. And that is when I realized the impact engineers have and the potential of change that we can bring as engineers. So that's what drew me in.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you. So yes, one of the things I'm excited about is that we actually, we have a diverse panel, different experiences, different things drawing you in. So, but I think the one thing that we all share, and I know that when, from speaking with many early career professionals that have transitioned from being students to employees, that the transition itself can be a little overwhelming. Given this, my next question is actually for the entire panel. And again, maybe I'll just pick one of you and you could go from there. But I'm wondering if you can share what your experience was like when you transitioned from a student into the workforce. So that maybe we'll start off with Dow this time.
Sounds good. I would say it was a interesting experience because in university, I was someone who was very involved, as much are some of the other panelists here. And so going from being kind of super knowledgeable and someone that's always kind of looked up to and asked for questions and knowledge about, do you remember this, student bill or what we did with this project? that changed because when you went into the workplace, you went back to the bottom and you had to start learning. And I almost equate it to like being a sponge. You want to soak up, in this case, water is knowledge, and you want to get as much as you can. But the other thing too is that when employers are looking at hiring people, an engineering degree really means that you can learn and you have an opportunity there as an employer to mold these candidates that you've kind of brought through the interview process and now have working for you, uh, to perfect the ways that you need them to help your organization. So learning the ways the organization wants me to be able to achieve productivity is something that was also an uphill battle, to try and learn.
Interesting. How about you, Ben? What was your experience when you transitioned from being a student and then suddenly now you're in the workforce?
Oh my goodness, I so echo what Dow mentioned. I mean, like when you're in school, you don't realize that it's pretty easy to find your niche, and especially if you're in the engineering leadership world, you kind of settle in with a group from orientation, and then there's programs that help you integrate, and for the most part, you find people with a common interest. And I think that when you're entering the professional world, and it's, even for me as an extrovert, like I found that integration was incredibly tough. And really, whether it be like a startup or a mega corporation, the transition really requires you to step outside of your comfort zone and be willing to interact with just different personalities, different perspectives, um, different levels of experience. And you really do feel like you're entering knowing that you're inferior, in both knowledge and experience. And so I think that one thing that really helped me grow was doing a lot of that self-reflection and realizing what my self-worth was, especially as an engineering training, that I had a lot of good ideas to bring to the table, that I come with new and fresh perspectives, and that I was in a position where I can ask those what people might call a dumb question. Like, because you interact with so many different worldviews, you have this amazing opportunity to learn from different skills and apply them in whatever way you see you're going to find your worth as an engineer. And I think that really helps to determine what you can challenge yourself with and when you feel that you're saturated, and when you realize you've hit your limit. I think that especially in an engineering degree, you kind of get molded into a person that is able to handle colossal challenges and knows how to deconstruct them to figure out what solutions work for you and in your work.
That's interesting. So just a quick follow-up to that. It's just, you mentioned that basically it's like you had to self-reflect and build up that confidence to be able to say, no, what, I'm going to ask that question. How long did you feel like it took for you, like from from day one? Like, did you find that it took like months? Did it take a year? Like,
I would say
did it
it
take to get to
was
that point?
a mix of a few things. Like as far as kind of being comfortable with being able to ask questions, I started in the field and I was with a rather small team within the construction management team that was willing to mentor me. But I've also been in other projects and roles where I had nobody. And it was very much something where I had to be comfortable knowing what questions to ask and also being willing to ask questions that maybe have already been answered, that I just never really registered the first time it was asked. And I think that that only came with experience, and that came with time, is what I would say. So I think it was a blend of being able to pick it up pretty quickly due to mentorship, but also when I was in a situation where there was no mentorship and I had next to no experience in what I was doing, it was a matter of, I would say, a solid few weeks before I was really up to speed.
That's fair. And how about you, Devaney? What was your experience transitioning from being a student into the workforce?
It's all of the above. Like it's very similar experiences. Um, I feel what I can add is perhaps that what Ven mentioned, that I really had to push myself. And I remember like the frustrations that I had with co-op was I wanted more responsibility. I wanted to be more involved. And this was one thing I started with. I started with that. And luckily, my organization, they were open and they were willing to give me more responsibility and be more involved. So I think apart from everything else, that really rewarded me and helped me like gain more confidence to ask, and I guess do more self-reflection and figure out what else I want and go for that.
Oh, that's great. Like you said, when you're, when you first start on a new job, you're still getting, you're like, there's all these different personalities, you're getting to know the different people. And then you have to ask something. Either you're asking to take on more responsibility and you're feeling nervous about that, or you're worried that you're going to ask a question and make a mistake. And so I could see how it's, I would say it's a challenge, like you were describing, like getting outside of that comfort zone. And I guess sort of as a follow-up to that question, and maybe I'll ask this one to you, Ben. How has your experience in and outside of the classroom informed the work that you're currently doing at, let's say, Capital Power?
Well, when I was graduating, I mean, when I was in school, I should say, I had a bit of a non-traditional route. A lot of folks in engineering, they focus on the books. For me, I was a lot ingrained in engineering leadership. So I did a lot of work with my Engineering Student Society, worked as a president, ended up going to the Canadian Federation of Engineering Students as a VP services. So it kind of became my world, and my engineering degree was complementary to that. So when I was thinking about where my best fit was going to be in the world of engineering, I kind of knew that I was going to be more unconventional. And lo and behold, at the end of my eng degree, I kind of knew I wanted to be in two different sectors. Either it was going to be biomedical engineering or it was going to be clean energy. And here we are in clean energy. So I think that with my job being a lot about technical delivery, overseeing aspects of engineering for our newest projects, I'm able to bring a lot of that technical expertise to help lead those efforts and then blend them with my skills that I learned in project management, technical communication, leadership. And that all created the great platform for me to be able to be successful as a project engineer in training. And I think that's something that I continue to grow with every day. Building my technical delivery while also using all the soft skills that I have that I developed in my undergraduate degree to be successful and to continue to grow.
My next question is actually for Daviani. So as a young woman, and I know that we've had a chance to talk before, and so I know that you came as an exchange student and now you're here as an immigrant living in Newfoundland. Are there any supports that you were able to tap into that set you up for success as a recent grad, sort of entering the workforce? Like, is there anything in particular that stood out for you that really helped you?
Personally, I feel there were a lot of resources at the university and even outside of university, but especially through like the career service center at the university. And I found myself going to a lot of career-related events, just because I kept on hearing that networking is really important and I should be growing my network and I should be networking all the time. So I found myself wondering what networking is because I didn't really get, let's say, at that time, my mindset was I wanted an engineering-related job in a specific field, but I wasn't getting it. But now when I think back to it, I feel that it was because of my first co-op, and my first co-op led me to have an informational interview with like the Paganel CEO. That's how I made the first connection. And then I was involved with the Engineering Society as a VP of finance, and through many of their events, again, I met Paganel CEO. And now when I think about it, when I like the interview that I did get with Paganel, I feel like that was because of the different opportunities, like the volunteer. And I guess in a sense, I didn't know I was doing networking, but I was. So yeah, but I feel that at the moment, for example, Paganel doesn't have a mentoring program for students, but I've noticed other engineering regulators that have a mentoring program. I feel that is a very streamlined pathway or to network and would definitely be beneficial. So that's just like an advice if anyone is looking to get a mentor, and definitely that would be very helpful in like before you get out into the workforce or like in your job search and everything.
Oh, fantastic. I guess sort of building off of the concept of like supports. So the whole reason why we built this Pathway to Engineering site was to ensure that we were providing a variety of different resources. We were hearing from, early career professionals and recent graduates that it was important and that there was a lot of confusion. And some of the pieces too that we were hearing a lot was that there's this real need and this importance to be able to include some information around equity, diversity, inclusion. And so we actually provided a whole section on the website dedicated to that. So Dow, maybe I'm going to bring this question over to you. I'm wondering if you can share your thoughts on why you think it's important that we, that we're talking about EDI, and specifically, why is it that it's important that we include EDI as part of the conversations that we're having today related to the pathway to becoming an engineer and getting your license? Like, what do you see as that connection's relevance?
It's huge because almost 2/3 of folks who particularly the stats from Ontario, from the folks at the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, 2/3 of folks who graduate from engineering degrees do not obtain licensure, and a third do not even go into the engineering profession. When we are in a period of time where we need engineers more than ever, that is a staggering number of graduates who are not entering the field. And this can be due to a number of different reasons, but one of the most noted reasons is a lack of support from engineering management teams. So this could be due to the management teams not finding work for them, or preferring other people in the team, and that really what that comes down to is a hard look at what companies are doing now. So equity, diversity, and inclusion, is we kind of know it on school campuses. I would say it's a lot more liberal, and the profession is a lot more conservative. And when you make that jump, going back to our first question on this panel, it's a significant jump. And that companies that don't include EDI in their goals essentially lose out on a grand opportunity to have critical thinking in different lights. They lose opportunities to have happy and healthy work environments, because as you have a more diverse team that is able to collaborate and share ideas that maybe weren't thought of by other folks, you're going to see an increase in productivity, and that's going to have a better retention of employees. So there's a lot of different factors that confluence together, or what we call the intersection of different areas, that equity, diversity, inclusion can not only help new graduates and young professionals go through their career, but they also help companies. And a lot of companies don't think that it's worth their time. But if you're able to put these two pillars together, that's when we're going to start seeing a lot more companies invest in it, because they're seeing not just an output for you, but an output for them. And that kind of is the short story on equity and kind of engineering, because we still have a long way to go. It's by far, something that we're working on, but there's always another day.
So maybe this is a question then for the entire panel. So we know that, based on what you were saying, so you're going from like university, which tends to be, much more liberal kind of environment, and then you're entering the workforce, and there's a bit of a shock there. So there's a shock because all of a sudden, like you were mentioning, what I've heard from everyone is like, you're brand new again. Suddenly you're the new kid on the block, and you're surrounded by people who know a little bit more. And now you're also surrounded by people who come with perhaps different worldviews, or different stages of their careers, all kinds of things. I'm wondering if any of you would be interested in sharing sort of your experience, or any barriers or challenges that maybe you have personally witnessed or personally experienced on your pathway, in your pathway to becoming an engineer, and how it is that you yourself are starting to navigate some of those challenges or barriers that you've encountered.
I'll jump in here.
Sure.
I think one of the biggest things that I've seen is going back to that management support. If you end up, say you've been working somewhere for 6 to 12 months, and you're just not finding that management is supporting you, as much as it's not necessarily a good thing to hop around to different jobs, you need the support of your management team in order to get your licensure. And if your personal goal is to get an engineering license, the management team that is overviewing your work and supporting you is going to be critical to your application, because all of the applications across provinces require references, and they require your supervisors to provide feedback. Recently, Ontario in 2022 changed, or 2023 changed their metrics, and now rather than just having general references, you need to have specific references for specific work experience, which is a very big thing. And so having a management team that supports you in the long run is going to greatly change the trajectory of your career.
Does anyone else want to jump in on this one?
I can kind of bounce off of that one and talk a little bit about just understanding what it means to be an EIT or a professional engineer and just the licensure process. I think that was a big barrier for me. I mean, I started and I went to UBC Okanagan, but I'm now in Edmonton, which means that I transitioned from EGBC to APEGA, which doesn't mean that it's the same. It's an entirely different process with different requirements and different standards. And so it's hard to know what to look at when you've got tons and tons and tons of different pieces of information to kind of extract from. It's very cloudy. And you also hear about these horror stories from older EITs, people who have just become fresh PNs, and how long it's taken their application processes. And really, the biggest thing that you can take from that is the importance of being able to learn and start to apply as soon as you can. I think that it's really important to take every opportunity that you can to learn about the application processes, to learn about the regulators, to get involved with your regulators, take every opportunity that you can to become informed and to ask the questions that are kind of ambiguous. Like, for example, when I graduated, APEGA actually held a emerging professional summit that gave me a really good general overview of what to expect in the EIT program and what to think about when I'm going into licensure. And I think that it's professional development opportunities like that that you can really engage with to help take advantage of it, especially if you're in a situation where maybe you don't have as much mentorship in the engineering world in your organization that you work with. The regulator is someone that you can really rely on, hopefully, that to give you that experience and that exposure that you need to understand what it means to become a PN.
Mm-hmm. And Deviani, I know that you're working for a regulator right now, and so I'm just wondering, like, what's been your experience, and what role do you? Maybe we'll just stop it there before we get into what the role, maybe the regulator and Engineers Canada might be. But just what have you personally experienced, and how did you navigate those things?
It's very similar to what Darwin when mentioned. Like, it's very important for management to know how important for you it is to get the licensure. And currently, like, Paganel is a small organization, so perhaps from that lens, when I do fill out, I guess before I jump into that, the first daunting step was the CBA. What is the CBA? It was scary. And it was my supervisor who mentioned that I should definitely look at it. And it was always pushed to the back of my list. And then she said, you know what, do the online training, make the account. And so it's like small gradual steps that now I'm comfortable with going into the CBA system and logging into, okay, this is what I got this year, and planning for the year ahead, like what I need to get and not. But that's another reason why like your supervisor or your management supporting your pathway to licensure is so important. And another facet is depending on the size of your organization or the type of the role you have, like you might not be able to fill all the competencies through that same work. And so I found it personally that I was a bit scared. So what am I supposed to do next? So I reached out to like my supervisor, and we sat down and talked about like the potential solutions, like maybe me being more involved in other projects that will help me gain competencies, even additional like formal learning, like courses. And yeah, so it's like organizations play a big role in providing you like support as well as regulators and Engineers Canada. But I guess the pathway to engineering is here to help us.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's funny. Like when we embarked on this project, we started looking across the board, as you said, because there's slight variations across the country, um, and so we knew that we needed to have sort of a centralized place to help figure that out. And we started talking to employers, and we started talking to individuals ourselves, and yeah, we heard the same thing as what we're hearing from you about. Like, one, it's really important just that you're aware that there's all these things, these different experiences that you need to be able to get, and then of course there's the how do you get them? How do you ensure that you have that? And so that's why I was really impressed with what I've heard from all of you too, because like that could be a tough conversation depending on the relationship that you have with your manager and the work you've been doing to date, to be able to say, hey, you know what, I really love what I'm doing, but there's this list of things based on like my future career goals. Like, did you find that when you did that conversation, did you find that you had to kind of sell them on the value of like letting you do these other projects, like almost sell them on the value of you getting your PN? Was that part of your conversation, or is it just, I see Van going, yeah, maybe. So maybe could you speak a little bit of that? Because I know I could see how it's like it could be a double-edged sword. So one, you have to like sell it to them, but then another side of it, I can see how it could be advantage for you to be like, to be able to be that in and give you that reason to go and ask to be able to diversify some of your work experience. But I wonder, maybe Van, I see it you.
Oh, yes. And I can give you a very specific example of this too. I work in the construction management industry. And when you're talking about construction management, you've got a lot of mechanical, civil, electrical, any kind of discipline engineers. And then you've also got your project coordinators who either came from a construction management background or aren't necessarily as engineering focused, if that makes sense. And so in my professional background, I spent some time working for a general contractor as a project coordinator that isn't necessarily required to be an engineer in training. While it can be, a lot of the work that you do is very focused on operations rather than technical expertise and design. And part of your competency-based assessment is to get your category 1 requirements, which is a lot of design heavy information that you need to be able to show you can apply. And so when you work for a general contractor, you have a lot of pushback when you're trying to talk about design because you're not the design engineer. You're there to respond. And so when you have those conversations with a manager in those kinds of situations, you do get that pushback because it's not part of your job and you have schedules and things that you have to meet and deadlines. And if you want to ask for these additional projects, you're asking for time outside of the workday. And so that's where it kind of pulls back to the whole conversation that Dow had earlier about asking about does your job, does what you do really meet what you're looking for in order to achieve your licensure? And if it's not, what kind of questions can you ask or what kind of things can you take on to help you get there? For me, as a project coordinator, that meant taking a lot more responsibility in figuring out, well, maybe can I provide a solution to the engineers to be able to review? And maybe that's what I do to get my category 1 design experience. And that's what also helped to build my technical box and be able to learn from the people that maybe aren't as technically oriented, maybe even from a tradesperson or from actual field workers. And so that's just one very specific example of what it looks like in the construction management industry. But I know that a lot of engineers do end up in this particular sector. And I think it's something that's really important to note when you're thinking about what does licensure look like for you, especially if you want to become a PN in the construction industry.
Mm-hmm. And Dow, I mean, you're the only one on the call right now who has their PNs. You just recently got your PN, so it's fresh in your mind. Did you encounter some of these challenges too, where you had to be like, hey, I know it. So one, were you lucky enough that early on in the game that you realized, hey, I have these competencies that I need to fill, and so you were kind of on it and had that path? And I'm just sort of curious, like, what was your experience like?
So I actually went through the old Ontario experience, which was basically you write the report and then you kind of send it into the black box and hope that it gets through. And so I will be the first person to admit that the PEO is working on their application processes. It's not all figured out, but they have in their new competency-based assessment, anyone who has applied after September 2023 has been responded to. So they are making their way through the backlog. I'm not a PEO spokesperson, but that's what I'm aware of. But one of the challenges with the application, and this kind of goes back to what Ven said, is if say in my line of work as a project manager in land development, I've always been on the permitting side with government relations, and my experience is explaining a design and its benefits to the government so that they can understand the long-term implications of assuming this infrastructure that's going to have to be maintained. It's going to cost the taxpayers money. And have we done a design that's efficient enough and supportive of a long lifetime investment? So this general kind of overview doesn't lend itself to some of the categories about design. But if I have to explain the design to people and prove how it works, you get the residual learning from it. And so for me, my PNG, it wasn't necessarily a difficult transition from, how we pulled from different projects to be able to write the report. And I was fairly lucky that my office turns around a lot of PNGs quite frequently. Every year we've got one or two who are applying. So, you can all work together and figure out how would you write for, this experience. That's kind of going back to pathways to engineering, finding peers in your age group that are going through the same process, or even in your own workplace that are going through the same workplace, so that you can bounce ideas off and see how they're writing their portion of the applications is super helpful. I know many of folks who used my report as a template after I had submitted and got my PNG. And now I'm helping people with the competency-based assessment and, what wording, what language is going to be used in their applications, because one of the things that the regulators look for is your ability to communicate. So the clearer and more concise that you can be in your communication, the more likely you are to find success through your review.
That's great. So I guess like we've covered it a little bit, but I'm wondering like both what I guess it's like, what do you see as the role? And it's what I'm hearing from you is that your employer has a huge role and it needs to be a conversation. And it sounds like you have to advocate for yourself. Like if you know that you want to get your license, you got to be prepared to have those conversations to get the experience that you need. And what I'm also hearing though is that they usually are quite receptive, which is good. I mean, you're going to have to problem solve together, but that's the beautiful thing about engineering. You're professional problem solvers, right? But what is it that you see as the role like of maybe outside of the company? So I see that both within the company and like an organization like Engineers Canada or the regulator, like when you were starting to talk about some of your challenges and some of your solutions about like finding peers that are also doing it, finding a mentor or someone who's recently done it. So I was like, Dal, that you've transitioned to that mentorship role where you're like, here's what I did, here's how I can help you do it. What other things do you think need to be in place? And do you see that there's like what is your expectation, or what should be your expectation of an employer or of the regulator in helping you on this path to licensure?
I think one of the biggest things for employers moving forward is going to be supporting employees getting the continuous learning. So you're just fresh out of university. You're like, great, I don't have to do any more exams. I don't have to do any more studying. Joke's on all of us, because a career is not a sprint, it is a marathon, and every day is a new day. You will learn something new every day. It is as much as people hate to hear the old adage, it is very true. And with new, it's particularly in Ontario, because I'm in Ontario, the PEO has implemented new continuous professional development requirements, mandatory as of 2024. And so employers in Ontario are starting to work with their employees to be ensure that they actually achieve their CPD hours. And so that's something that I think moving forward, we're going to see a lot more from employees. We're also going to see in the educational workspace area, you're going to see a lot more endeavors towards providing training sessions that can complement what folks are looking for. In terms of the regulator, I think it varies depending on the province. But one of the things that, and I think some of us can share this experience, is that having studied out of Ontario, so I actually studied at McGill University in Quebec, I learned the process for OIQ. I did not learn the process for PEO. So when I came to Ontario, I had to relearn the professional practice requirements and the differences between the civil code in Quebec and the Ontario code. I think as regulators, having that information more readily available is something that they are working towards. And the Pathways to Engineering website is a great tool to be able to find all of those resources.
That's great. So I guess I want to open it up now to to the audience, because I noticed that we have a few questions that have been coming in, and please feel free to continue to put those in there. This is your opportunity to talk to your peers who are in the same spot as you, or who might just be a little bit further ahead to get some of those tough questions answered. I'm just looking here in the chat, and I see that we have a couple of questions about gaining experience, especially without a co-op. So for instance, Ven, I understand you didn't take a co-op path. How did you approach gaining work experience?
Well, actually, it was a double-edged sword. I wasn't a co-op student, and I was a 5-year degree plan. So I extended my degree a little bit longer than I should have. And I think that part of it was, well, I did get some summer experience, but wasn't your traditional co-op. I was working for engineering outreach with my university. And so when it came to figuring out how to leverage what skills I had, it really came down to what was I doing that made me stand out outside of the classroom. And for me, that was engineering leadership, that was student groups, that was using whatever I was able to pull from design teams or student leadership or whatever it may be, and letting that be what makes me stand out. And so when I went and entered any kind of interview or job panel, I kind of used that as my leverage and used that as my storyteller to tell them the story of who I am as an engineer. And that only came after a lot of reflection over what my skills and strengths were and kind of realizing what I was most passionate about. Then complementary to that, especially in my graduating year, and even for those of you who may have graduated and in my first year of having graduated, trying to put myself out there into any kind of networking event that I could have, pulling business cards, trying to start those conversations, adding people on LinkedIn and not letting those conversations die, are huge. They're huge factors to helping you to kickstart your engineering journey and finding a place for you. And the best outcome of that is that because you've already established a connection, you have a mentor that you can rely on. And whether it be with their organization or with something else, those connections really do matter.
It's great.
I just want to add to what Ven is saying, because one of the things too that everyone assumes is like, oh, I have to have co-op experience. You really don't, because a lot of the engineering regulators won't count it if it's in your first or second years of study. It only counts when you hit that 50% threshold in your degree study. So if, say, you're doing a 4-year program, only your third and fourth years are going to start counting towards the professional time that you need in order to gain a PN license. I was able to use some of my experience at the City of Toronto, which was my internship, towards my licensure, which reduced the overall time. In Ontario, it's 48 months, so I was able to claim 7 through the City of Toronto. But again, if I had done any of that prior to my 3rd year, it wouldn't have counted. So it's something that also students and professionals who are kind of like trying to come into the engineering licensure realm need to think about as well. Like master programs, for example, master programs can count towards specific time requirements, and those time requirements also vary depending on the province you're in.
That's great. I mean, that's a big part of what we were thinking through too, around when we were creating this website that sort of aggregates this information. You know, like, how do we make sure that this is easier for folks to understand and navigate all different ways that you could be getting and what counts towards experience based on where they're applying. And you know, the some of the things that I know that I've mentioned is like some of our regulators have like full out programs related to engineers and training and support, and some of them don't. And that are starting to explore, you know, how do they fill in the gap from an employer, you know, so a lot of it's put on the employers right now. A lot of it is having you have to advocate for yourself and be aware of the requirements are. And so Engineers Canada is hoping to fill a bit of that gap by giving you a one-stop shop where it's like, here's everything that you need to know in order to get your license. But the tough part is making sure that you're able to get them. And so there's been a couple more questions, and I think it's because a lot of people are in the same situation. And I know that some of you have addressed it a bit, but this piece around the importance of how is it that you communicate your needs to employers. And I know, Ven, you gave an example, but it looks like the audience wants us to dig a little bit more into like, how is it that you advocate for yourself in a way that, you know, that doesn't make you feel, well, maybe it will make you feel awkward and maybe makes you feel vulnerable, but what kind of advice might you have for someone who doesn't have a co-op or, you know, doesn't have access to an engineering training kind of program? and then therefore kind of reliant on their employer. And specifically, and if your employer isn't able to provide you with that experience, like, are there other avenues that you've had to navigate, other experiences that you might have that you might be able to share with the listeners?
Well, I guess the first thing that I'll add is, especially when you're going into a job interview, remember that the job interview isn't just for them to take you, it's for you to take them as well. So if professional licensure is really important to you, and now that you're here and you're listening and you're understanding, ask the question, what does mentorship look like at the organization? What does it look like for people who want to get their professional licensure? Because I'm sure that you're not the first. And when they explain it to you, understand what does that mean for you if you were successful in joining that organization. Now, once you're at that organization, and let's say it's not necessarily what it seems, I would probably go the route of tapping into your colleagues. If you can't get it from a manager, ask your colleagues who's a professional engineer at this organization, or create that mentorship for yourself. See if there is a mentor out there who's willing to help you, because I'm sure that they'll have their own experiences that they will want to talk for hours and hours and hours on end about, if you give them the opportunity, and just be there in a position to learn from them. If that doesn't necessarily exist, there are other mentoring programs out there too that aren't necessarily with organizations. One that comes to mind here in Alberta, at least with my organization, we partner with something called the Rosie Mentorship Program, which helps women in STEM to pair themselves with a mentor within the industry to allow them to understand more about what it means for them and what it means to grow as a woman in STEM. And I think that's an exceptional tool for you to use. So it really just is a matter of looking to see what's out there, using Google to your advantage if that mentorship doesn't exist, and then tapping into your colleagues, because you're definitely not alone. Definitely people have done this before.
Something I would add along the lines for like how to frame the question is, normally when I have gone on to ask something, I will also go along with three responses, like three options, like if for example, let's say it's about communication, if you let me do or run this meetings, um, I can either do that or I can take a course, or whatever is comfortable to you. So I go with a bunch of options, so it's not like on them to completely solve it. And I also wanted to add on Ven's point was, I found that I don't know if it exists on all universities, but for Memorial University, we have like an alumni networking um, software. It's called 10,000 Coffee, and like I often, like every month, I get paired with a STEM professional. So that's something you could look into as well.
So I guess one of my last questions, I guess, would be, given where you are currently on your respective pathways to engineering, and for those who are already have their P-Engine and have invested in wanting to try and support, the next up and comers, what is it that you feel like an organization like Engineers Canada, who's not a regulator and is not a company, how might we be able to support outside of simply creating this resource that starts to connect people? I'm hearing a lot about mentorship. I'm hearing a lot about potentially helping to support in connecting individuals to their peers to help having these conversations. I'm just thinking, like, are there things, or even like, are there things right now, as like, so especially for Ben and for Deviani, who are currently on the path to licensure, are there things that you wish you had available to you right now, or things that would make your life easier as you're trying to get your license? And then now, I guess, in a similar vein, through your experience in helping support that next generation, in particular from that EDI lens, because I know you bring a really interesting, is there anything that you think would be supportive of helping different marginalized groups in particular? Like, are there different needs there, different things that we need to be considering to provide that kind of support?
I think the first thing for me, especially if we're talking about the job hunt, now I should add, I had the unfortunate reality of having to look for a job in the middle of a pandemic. Um, but in all reality, it still holds true. I think that a devoted open space, whether it be a job board or whatnot, for specifically engineer in training roles and how they support the professional development program, like almost having it as a part of the requisite to be a part of that job order open space. I think that would be a really great tool for a team like Engineers Canada or for Pathway to Engineering to have. And I should also add just the fact that Pathway to Engineering now exists is going to be a very big player in this. But in addition to that, I think having something like that that allows employers to show that they're supportive of the EIT and the PEng process while also securing new EITs to join their organizations, I think is a great two-way tool.
Right. But Devyani or Alex, do you have any thoughts?
I touching back on your question about kind of Engineers Canada's work with EDI and the regulators, I think that there's only so much that Engineers Canada can really do within the scope and confines of what your mandate is. And one of the things that Engineers Canada does is they look for organizations that do a lot of the grassroots work, like Engineers Careers Canada. And in doing so, it provides a large amount of validation to those who are living through experiences that may not be positive or may be positive. Like there could be a whole other avenue to it. And that's something that I see as being critical moving forward, because if we look at how underrepresented groups in engineering are going to be increasing their share, like the Engineers Canada Initiative 30 by 30, it's critical that we combine the efforts of all of these groups to bring a broader voice to the diversity message within engineering. And that doesn't just go for firms that are existing today. We're going to see, with the baby boomer generation retiring, we're going to see a very large retirement number that needs to get replaced in both mid-level and senior management. So there's going to be ample opportunities coming up in the between now and the next 10 years that Engineers Canada is going to be able to forge ahead and encourage with education, EDI, and general programs like this, Pathways to Engineering.
Mm-hmm. I guess one question that we just got in the chat here that probably maybe should have been my first question, really. One of the question is that we know that there's a little bit of work in order to get your PEng. It's not just write an ethical exam and then you're ready to go. You have to demonstrate your work experience, all those kinds of things. So the question here is, what was your personal motivations to start pursuing your PEng designation and to continue through the process? So you might have been like, yeah, I'm going to get my PEng, and then you discover, oh, there's all these things I have to do. So what is that? What's kept you motivated, one, to do it, and then to actually follow through with it once you realized everything that might be involved?
Personally, for me, it's a professional community. It's that sense. That is what the value is for me. I guess it's maybe from always trying to start to get from zero. So I feel yeah, like for me the value is in the professional community. Yeah.
Right.
There's a level of respect that personally I noticed in being an EIT versus being a PEng. There's a different level of trust that is held by folks when you're speaking as an EIT. They generally, that's like, great, like you've explained it really clearly, but they may go and ask for a second opinion, or they may ask your supervisor, like, have you vetted this conversation that they're talking about? As soon as I got my PEng, that discussion ended. It was, what is he saying? What is the message of the project? And that's the message that we're going to follow. So it carries a lot of weight and respect, but it also carries a lot of responsibility. And because now you can't just go back on your word, you have to believe in your word. The safety net has been pulled away. You are now an engineer. So that's something that is definitely a daily reminder when speaking to clients and speaking to government officials about, engineering projects and what we do. That's something that, I don't take lightly. And so in terms of getting the license, that wasn't the goal for me. The goal was more a personal one because my uncle had it and I wanted to get one too, but that's definitely something I've seen change.
Yeah, I think like when you first graduate, there's two things you look forward to. It's the day that you get your PEng and the day that you get your iron ring. And if you remember with the iron ring, there's a whole level of story behind it related to ethics and responsibility. And the same thing comes down to your PEng. Ultimately, as a professional engineer, as Dow mentioned, there's a level of ethical responsibility and leadership that's expected from a professional engineer. And I think that when I finally became an AIT and I was considering, do I continue with the process or not? In the world of project engineering, when you've got such critical high stakes demands and you're dealing with permitting and contracting and really, really large scale decisions that affect public safety, it's really important that a professional engineer is responsible for that work and is responsible for maintaining the integrity and the ethics of whatever you do. And that gets associated with the designation. So I think that there's a level of responsibility that's associated with it that isn't just a want, it's a need that society needs.
Mm. That's fantastic. So I can't believe as expected, this hour has just flown by. We have like 2 minutes left, and if in that time I want to be able to provide, because we've covered so much, I'm wondering if for everyone who's joined us today, if you had to leave them, which is one thing, like one takeaway from today, like what is your message to the audience today? What's the one thing that you'd like them to walk away with from this, from their experience with us today? Tough question.
It is, yeah. I think one of the biggest things is that, especially for new graduates who are just entering the profession, you may not like it. Like that's an okay reality, because again, a career is a marathon. You have the majority of your life to go through it. Don't be afraid to look at other qualifications and other routes of education. If you're gung-ho on getting your PEng, there are other things that can complement that. So, you can go get a PMP and become a project management professional. You can go back to school and study education, law, medicine, or you can go into the technical trades. Like, there's a whole plethora of options still available to you. You're young, you have opportunity, go for it.
Mhm. And there's just so many disciplines too, right? You know what I mean? Like different, like you said, with what you have, there's lots of avenues that you could take within engineering.
Yeah, and
Might be
like
experiencing one, but there's other, other
yeah,
ways.
like there's mechanical engineers doing chemical engineering jobs, and there's chemical engineers doing mechanical engineering jobs. Like, the interdisciplinary opportunity that an engineering degree will give you allows you to carry that experience forward into areas that you may like more.
Yeah, I think like just to bounce off of that, the world just needs engineers who care. And we really do live in a world that just continuously becomes more polarizing, that needs to see people who care about equity, diversity, and inclusion, people who understand the criticality of things like Indigenous reconciliation in engineering work. And I think there's just going to continue to be more tricky and difficult conversations that need the fresh faces of a graduating engineer to help to lead those conversations to happen. And I think that if anything, as you pursue the professional engineering designation and as you pursue an engineering career, don't let yourself get scared off from those difficult conversations and know your worth. I think it's so important to know what you're passionate about, to understand when maybe something has failed and to build from it and to understand it. Obviously, we always talk about wanting to fail safely. And part of that is understanding that, yes, failure will happen, but what can we do to learn from it, and what can we do to make um, our engineering careers, even in a more real sense here, more fruitful. And I think for me, that passion, that want to continue to learn every day comes from the work that I do. Like, I'm so proud that I can one day look outside and realize I've developed that. I created more clean energy that I brought to this particular grid to help power homes, to make sure that we have enough reliable and affordable electricity. And that's a really cool thing. And I think that's something that you have to remember, that even though the journey is not going to be easy, there is passion behind it, and that you have to find what that passion is. And I know that's a hard question to answer, but it's something that you can answer up over time.
Hmm.
To answer your question, Kim, like, what's one thing that, if you're an engineering student, my advice to you is take every opportunity that's given to you, like networking. Maybe it might not show the results just instantaneously, but it will over time. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. This has been an incredible webinar. I'd like to thank all of you for sharing your time and expertise with us about your journey, how you're transitioning from a graduate life to EIT and professional engineering work. Like yourselves, Pathway to Engineering is at the start of its own journey. So we are looking forward to growing the network and helping to connect graduates with people and knowledge to become engineers. If you've got ideas or suggestions, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, on the web at pathwaystoengineering.ca, or send us an email at connect@pathwaystoengineering.ca. We hope all of you continue to join us with Pathways as we post more blogs and as we host more webinars like this. And with that,
All
I'd
of
like
us
to
at
pass it
Engineers
to-
Canada are very excited to see Pathway to Engineering begin to come into its own. And we're so excited to see how else this platform can help connect engineering students and graduates and early career professionals about the licensure process, just like we've done today. I want to thank not only all of our panelists, as well as Kim for moderating, but all of our attendees as well. And we are happy that you took the time to join us here today as an engaged and thoughtful audience. We hope to see you again soon. Take care, everyone. Bye.